is of one that attempts to stir us to keep on keeping on and keep on running the Christian race. And as we focus on this race, there's some things that I want us to look at tonight. And we're going to begin with the inspiration of this race, and that is, there is a great cloud of witnesses. I got a question for you right here that I'm interested to know at least what you think about this. And the reason I say what you think about this, I do not often leave something, open to, okay, this could go either way. It depends on you and what you think about it, or how you view it. But at the same time, in verse 1, he says, "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses." I want to stop right there and ask this question. Who do you think these witnesses are? There are two views, okay, of who these witnesses are. And I'm one of these people who, when theologians can't necessarily agree on who they are, and really I don't think anybody gets so strong about who they are, but at the same time, I'm interested in hearing from you. Who do you think these witnesses are? Now, don't everybody yell at me at one time, okay?
These are the people that were saved and died and were taken to heaven.
Okay, that is one view of this, okay? Is anybody else have a different view of this?
Well, I thought mine was, that almost sounds like we just read the Heroes of Faith.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking what I was thinking is the same thing that she said. I heard Jay Burger say that this is not people just down here looking at us. It's the heroes of faith and Moses, and it's their witnesses.
Okay.
Is that the same thing, basically?
Yeah, I think chapter 11 says who they are. Go
Okay.
back to chapter
But
11.
I used to think it was just like the present
Yeah.
people who died.
Okay.
It's the people
All right.
Oh, well, it's.
All right. You've touched on both of the views of this. Okay.
It's the difference
And
in
there are some who believe that these witnesses are the saved ones who have gone to heaven, which leaves open the indication. Yes, it could. Well, they could be the church. They could be the Old Testament saints too. Either way. Hello. But at any rate, what the thought is, and when those who believe that say that that the people in heaven have a earthly view. That is, they see what's going on earth now. Okay. And so they are up there, in essence, cheering us on, okay? Keep up the fight. Keep going. Keep going. The other view is what, again, you all touched on there, was the fact that we have just gone over. And what you have to remember, that in the original writings, the chapters and verses were not broken up like they are. This was done later, okay? And so this would have all tied together. And my thinking is that he's talking about these who are in this hall of faith, these saints who have endured, they stood the test, they proved with their lives their faith, okay? Many of them gave their lives, and you take others, like Abraham, he looked for a city whose builder and maker was God, okay? He never got hooked on even the land. If you recall, God gave Abraham a land, okay? And when you stop and you really consider the fact, we talked about this when we looked at Abraham, Abraham never did have that land. And that is, he never did possess the land. He lived in it, but he never possessed it like Israel did after Canaan, right? Or after Joshua. He never possessed the land. But from what I can gather here from reading Hebrews, Abraham wasn't focused on that piece of property that was on earth that God was talking about, Abraham was looking up, okay? He was looking for a city, or to a city whose builder and maker was God. Abraham was looking at heaven, in essence, okay? His focus was not here, it was there. He didn't care anything about this down here. In fact, in time of famine, now we criticize him for this and we say it was a lack of faith, but in one sense, and this is something just, as I'm thinking about this, comes to my mind, Abraham was not so hooked on that particular piece of property that when famine come, he didn't go somewhere else to try food. Okay? He was not, well, God gave me this, is God going to, he went somewhere else. Now, the way that he went, he messed up, okay? And he did that twice, by the way. He didn't just do it one time, and he made the same mistake both times that he went. I mean, it wasn't like, somebody said we learn by our mistakes sometimes. Sometimes. But Abraham committed the same mistake. And then if you stop and think about it, he also set a pattern because later on Isaac would do the very same thing. Okay? But the thing is this cloud of witnesses, are they the saints of chapter 11? That's kind of my thinking, and possibly goes broader than that. Just because they weren't mentioned here does not mean they're not included in that, but he certainly is using these as an example. And then, there are some who believe that, okay, the saints in heaven are watching over the earth. They can see what's going on here. I'm not sure if that's so or not, okay?
That's the one I was trying to.
Right. That's the other,
Yeah.
that's the other view. And I'm not sure whether they can or they can't. I don't know that this verse proves they can. Let's put it like that. And I don't know of any verse that proves they can, but at the same time, I don't know of any verse that proves they can't, okay? We do know that to some degree, they know what's going on earth, do they not? In heaven, okay? They're aware of it. How? I don't know the mechanism that's in place. Whether it is God who keeps them informed or whether they can see. It may very well be that they can see what's going on here just as God can see what's going on here. But at any rate, that's the two views concerning this. And I kind of hold to the fact that since in the original there was no chapter divisions, that probably this writer has in mind these folks that are listed here in chapter 11, okay? Because he has spent 40 verses, by our standards, by the way we look at it, telling us about various individuals and the faith that they had. And now he says, wherefore, see, we also are encompassed about with so great a cloud of witness. These are people who stood fast. They did not have it easy. They stood for God. Regardless of the trials, regardless of the temptations, regardless of the opposition. And what we also learned from chapter 11 was the fact that many of these people, they gave their lives for this faith that they held on to. They died for their faith. And sometimes we focus that it was just those folks in the New Testament, the early church folks that gave their lives for the cause of Christ. But when you stop and you look about it and you begin to think about it, there were others. In one sense, did not Samson give his life for Christ or for God? I mean, after all, when he grabbed those pillars and took that building down, did he not know that he would die along with everybody else in that building? And so in essence, he gave his life as well. We know that we talked about this last week, about history telling us that Isaiah was one who was tortured to the degree that he was sawn asunder. He was stuffed in a log, and the log was cut in half, and Isaiah was cut in half for Christ, okay? And so we know that many of them spent time in prisons. They went to prison for their faith. And so we know that these people gave their life for the cause of Christ. And I think what God is trying to get across to us in this particular passage that we're looking at tonight is simply this, that, hey, these people paid a price. They were people who endured all the way to the end, And what his attempt is with this is to say to you and I, you're going to go through trials. You're going to go through testings in this life, okay? And as you go through them, keep these folks in mind, because everybody wants to have it easy, do we not? You know, these people were people just like us. And no, he's not mentioned in this particular passage, but when you think about Jeremiah was one who was not beyond discouragement. He was discouraged. He spent much of his time in prison, preaching to a group of people, prophesying, telling them what's going to happen, and nobody would listen to him. And go back to Jeremiah 20, if you will. Jeremiah in this chapter, chapter 20, finds himself in prison. He is, now let's go back up to let's start with verse 7. We could probably go back further, but let's go to verse 7. He says, O Lord, thou hast deceived me, and I was deceived. Thou art stronger than I, and hast prevailed. I am in derision daily. Every one mocketh me. Nobody likes to be made fun of, do they? We don't like it when people make fun of us, do we? Yet daily he endured mocking. And then he says, For since I spake, I cried out, I cried violence and spoil, because the word of the Lord was made a reproach unto me, and a derision daily. Then I said, I will not make mention of him, nor speak any more in his name. But his word was in mine heart as a burning fire, shut up in my bones, and I was weary with forbearing, and I could not stay. What he found out was that it didn't matter what he was going through. God was still God. The message was still true, that God was going to send judgment, and the people needed to be warned, and he couldn't keep his mouth shut. Now think about that. We know that the world is headed for judgment. I just cannot help but wonder, is not coronavirus a judgment upon a godless world? That God is saying, look at me, I'm stronger than you. I can present something that you've never seen before. I can push a button and you'll panic down there, okay? You'll go into panic mode. And God is still God. These people went on, regardless of the cost, regardless, they kept going forward. And seeing, therefore, folks, that we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, then he goes on and he says, let us lay aside every weight. Somebody want to tell me, what is the weights?
Something keeps you from God, that holds you down.
Okay.
Doing what God wants.
Okay. Now let me ask you this. Does a weight indicate sin? Okay. No?
I don't think so. There's
Okay.
a lot of things that can discourage us, but it don't mean it's sin. And I know where he's sin, don't get me wrong. But there's things out of our control that can weigh us down.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there any good things that might be a weight? Things that we would never even look at as sin?
Yeah, someone you want saved and they're not going in, they could be dying, with an illness, and you've witnessed and they won't listen. And that's a weight to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? What about something you enjoy doing? I mean, if you enjoy doing something, couldn't that be a weight that hinders you, that holds you back from being what God wants you to be? And so we need to realize that in order to be inspired by this cloud of witnesses, we have to realize that there are some required disciplines that come along with it. And some of those things are simply things that are not bad. They're just things that get in the way of us serving God, okay? Pleasures, things that we enjoy that would not be considered, nobody would look at them and call them sin, but they get in our way of being or doing what God wants us to do. Then he goes ahead and he tells us something else that we're supposed to do. He says, let us lay aside every weight, and then the sin which doth so easily beset us. Now that we don't have to really define very much, do we? I mean, if there's sin in our lives, we allow sin to come in, and if we don't, if we don't deal with it, then it becomes a weight. It becomes a hindrance to us in serving God. And here's what someone I come across when I was studying this said: some sins can be easily avoided, but are not. Some sins are mired, yet must be laid aside. Some sins are ensnaring, and thus especially harmful. And some sins are more dangerous than others. And so what we have to do is we have to keep a look on ourselves and put aside those weights, those sins, those things which must be put away. And then he goes on and he says, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Define patience. Okay, that would be patience. Okay.
The ability to wait when you don't want to.
Ability to wait when you have to, right? Too. I like that. I like that.
Or endurance, things
Okay.
makes you think of another side where you just keep
All right.
and going for a long, wait, so specifically, you're just going on for the length.
Yep.
Long haul.
Okay. This word is a word that means, taken from a Greek word, and you're all right on track. Endurance, fortitude, steadfastness, constancy, and perseverance. Patience causes us to persevere. It keeps us going on regardless. We don't allow ourselves to be circumstance controlled. Okay? Why? Well, because we have an example. That is, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of God. A couple things that we look at here. One is the understanding that Jesus himself participated in this race. One of the conclusions when you study the life of Christ and when you study the Bible, you come to the conclusion that Jesus will not ask us to do anything, or God will not ask us to do anything that he himself will not do. That he himself, he doesn't ask us to go through anything that he himself has not already gone through. In fact, what we discovered back, I believe it was chapter 4, that he has been touched with every one of our infirmities. He's been tempted in every area, just like we have. And yet he came and he went through without sin. He becomes our example. He participated in the race. And what was the joy? Because to be honest with you, when you read this particular verse and you think about the circumstances of the cross, in fact, you start thinking about the circumstances of his whole life. Right from the very beginning. Other than the wise men and the shepherds, most of the world did not accept him, did they? They weren't all that thrilled that he was on the scene. And so even from an infant, here his parents had to hide him, and they had to look out for him because the world was already against him. Then as he grew, as he began his earthly ministry, the religious crowd very strongly against him. In fact, when you stop and you look at at the Gospels and you see his opponents, if you will, that was the religious crowd. They were the ones who were the biggest crowd that was against him. The Romans didn't seem to care what he did, right? They wouldn't seem to be intimidated at all. However, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the religious crowd, they hated about everything that he stood for, and they tried to accuse him on every account and everything that he did. In fact, when you think about it, here's what he did. He bore a shameful accusation, that is blasphemy. They accused him of being a blasphemer. He bore shameful mocking. He bore shameful beating. He wore a shameful crowd. He wore a shameful robe. And he bore shameful mocking even as he prayed on the cross. They mocked him even as he's on the cross, and his prayer is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They're still mocking him, okay? And so here it is, even that thief that was on the cross, both of those thieves, even the one that did get saved, they both mocked him even before the one got saved. He was mocking him as he hung on the cross. And then it finally come to his mind that, we're here because of what we did. He didn't do anything, and look at him. He's here. And it began to work in his mind and changed his heart there on the cross, because here was the innocent man being crucified with the guilty. Okay? But then we read something here, and we'll come back to the author and finisher of the faith, but it says, for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. What joy was in the cross for him? For you and me, we find joy, okay? What joy was in the cross for Jesus? Because here we are told, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. So there was joy. What joy was there?
Well, he was doing his Father's will, for one.
Okay.
And secondly, for the salvation of mankind.
There you go. He was obedient unto the Father, even obedient unto death. And secondly, for those who would believe. Go back to the book of Jude, and I believe it's verse 24, if my memory serves me well here. Yeah, verse 24. If you want to make a note of this, anytime somebody asks you what was the joy, this is where you'd want to take them to, okay? Jude, verse 24. It says, now unto him that is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. That sums up his joy. He is able to keep us. Once he has you, folks, he can't turn you loose. He's got you. Because it's not because you're holding him. It's because he's holding you. Okay? And as long as you're held by him, you're in good shape. Okay? He was the supreme example. Now, what does it indicate to us? That Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. I've preached this so many times, y'all won't be able to answer this without studying. What does it mean that he was the author and finisher of our faith?
He started.
Okay. All right. It all started and ends with him. He went to the cross for you and me. He died for us. It was he who gave us the faith to believe, even. We didn't muster up that faith on our own. He gave us the faith to believe. And he is also the one who keeps us. And he has sealed us with his Spirit, until the day of redemption. He is the one that keeps us. And so it began with him, it will end with him. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the Father. He is the supreme example, receiving the reward of faith. He was exalted to the right hand of God. And so he is the one to whom all of this is due. He was our example. These folks were witnesses that we should be willing to follow. Him, we should be looking to him. When we look to him, this world kind of loses its glory to our eyes. All right, let's look at the controlling factor here in verse 3. He says here, for consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest you be weary. In life, we go through, especially in our Christian walk, we go through ups and downs, do we not? We go through rejection. Many folks will reject us just like they rejected him, right? And so, what does it mean here? That word contradiction was a word that drew my attention when I read this. What does the word contradiction mean? That's it. Hostile. Opposition. Rebellion. They rebelled against him. Right from the very beginning, right up to the end, they rebelled against him. They did not accept him. They rejected him. Whatever he did, it seemed like there was somebody there to point the finger, to say you either did it at the wrong time, you didn't do it the right way, or you shouldn't have done it at all, okay? So he was rejected. He had opposition. We are to focus, though, on his sufferings. When he says here, consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself. That is, let's just think about what he went through, and we think about what we're going through. There is no comparison. Nobody has ever asked us, and I'll get into this later here in this last verse, nobody's asked for our blood yet. Yet there have been many who did shed their blood for him. When we compare our sufferings with his suffering, it keeps us from becoming weary. When we think about what he went through, it keeps us from becoming exhausted and tired and worn out. And it keeps us from relaxing when we should be working. Why? Because